for excusing me from last month. I had an awesome trip to Yellowstone with my son as a Father's Day gift, and didn't miss it. So great week out there.
Unfortunately, he didn't check with us on dates.
He checked with my assistant.
Yeah.
So. Roll call, James.
Good morning. I'll read the roll. Please let us know if you're here. Commissioner Carl Baxmeyer. Here. Councilman Jessica Bohannon.
I'm here electronically.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. Gotcha, noted. Here. Commissioner Mike Burrows. Here. District Deputy Commissioner Deitchley. Councilman Dwight Fish. Councilman Doug Graham. Here. Commissioner Carrie Groninger. Here. Councilwoman Carrie Groninger.
Okay.
Kathy.
Here.
I read wrong lines there. Sorry.
No worries.
Councilwoman Lori Hammond. Councilman Greg Hicksonbaugh. Here. Mayor Phil Jenkins. District Deputy Commissioner Todd Johnson. Here. Mayor Gina Lichty.
Here.
Mayor. All right. I got you, Mayor. Mayor James Mueller. Mayor Rod Robertson. Councilman Mark Root. Here. Mayor Mark Center. Here. Mayor Joseph Tallmer.
Here.
Commissioner Susie Wyrick. She said she was running a few minutes late, so she should be joining us. And then Mayor Dave Wood. All right. We do have a quorum of members present. We will only be voting in person though. I'll turn it back over to you.
Finance report, Deb.
Hey, James.
Hey, Mayor, how are you?
Hey, just want to check in. Is here.
All right, we got you noted.
All right. I realize I don't have voting privileges. I turn those over to Dave Wood.
All right.
You also have the August 2023 financial report in your packet. Through the end of August, we are at year-to-date of $1,352,107 which is approximately 11.5% of our total budget. Our cash balance at the end of August was $2,060,750.31. And our disbursement for the month of August was $687,621.15. Are there any questions over the phone?
Move to approve. Second. We have motion second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, ma'am.
No, it's not, but I could cover it. Yeah, we can do that too. We'll need to do the minutes from September 14th. Let's skip it. Sorry.
How about the minutes from last month?
Make a motion to approve.
Second. We have motion second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Then I'll cover the Secretary's report from Mayor Jenkins. In your packet, you should have all the September modifications. These are corrections or changes that you have given staff the authority to make between meetings to the Transportation Improvement Program. This is presented for informational purposes only. It does not require board action. This listing is also published online for public to view. If you have any questions about any of those changes, please feel free to let us know. That concludes Mayor Jenkins' report.
New business, Mr. Turnbull.
All right, we have a few items of new business, and I'll turn it over to Caitlin to present the transportation resolutions.
Good morning. We have one transportation resolution 30-23. The project is sponsored by NDOT. It's an HMA overlay from State Route 23 from the Potato Creek Bridge to Olive Street in South Bend. This action is just adding in the right-of-way phase into our transportation improvement program. If there are no questions, I'd ask for your approval of transportation resolution 30-23.
So moved.
Second.
We have motion second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
All right, and another exciting resolution I have to present to you is 31-23, which is the endorsement of the Michiana on the Move 2050 Transportation Plan. In your packets, we have a summary of comments that we received during our public comment period for this document. I also have a few copies of the final document ahead, but this is kind of a culmination of a year's worth of work with our local governments as well as state partners and other stakeholders to produce this document that really sets the framework for transportation investment in our region over the next 20 plus years. So during our public comment period, we received a total of 11 comments. Some of them related to the interurban trolley routes in Goshen that are proposed. There was also some comments related to kind of development that's happening near New Carlisle and the impacts of kind of rail safety in that corridor. As well as some general comments kind of specific to a few of the projects that have been recommended in the plan. Overall, none of the comments that we received related to any substantive change in our document, but wanted to provide them for reference, and we'll also be including them in the appendix of the document. I'm happy to answer any questions about the plan. Our next step after the board's consideration of approval would be to work on our air quality conformity documentation and approval with our state and federal highway partners to make this plan an official document over the next 4 years. It's still a living document, so we do have the capability of amending as new projects are introduced that might not be incorporated into the plan, but yeah, I'm happy to take any questions. Otherwise, I would ask for your approval and endorsement of resolution 31-23.
So moved, but I have a comment or a question to add to that. Under the safer and quieter railroads in the Atlantic area, we have been talking to quite a few residents out there. I'm also the representative on the NICB board, and I just wanted noted that the plan is when the station moves from the east side to the west side, first of all, it'll eliminate 21 at-grade crossings. There will be 5, but 21 will be eliminated. Secondly, it's the intention of NICB to make those quad gates so that we can designate that stretch as a quiet zone. So I just wanted to add that there's a comment in here about that, and we appreciate the help that MACOG is providing with that, but just want to let you know we are moving ahead with that plan.
James, at the risk of going down the rabbit hole in the quiet zones, could you give me just a couple bullet points on what railroads ask communities to do? We've got a lot of inquiries in our community about quiet zones. Just kind of the high level, what's that involved?
Yeah, a lot of it is focused on reduction of risk. And so different options related to improving overall signage and safety for motorists. So a lot of the things that you might think about at crossings are what type of gate structures they have. So, quad gates that come down on all 4 sides are usually something. Center median delineators are usually another option, but also sometimes, and not in every situation, but sometimes the railroad would want to see maybe a reduction in the total number of crossings that are on that stretch. And so that potential for crossing closure is always a point of conversation with the railroads and FRA when you're thinking through some of those things. So that's a little bit as a high level, but essentially what you do is just kind of like look at that corridor, look at the safety at each of those. There's usually rating functions that you can do, and then start to think through how to make those safety improvements. Because you're going to try and get it usually an area designated, not one crossing, right? And so when you're looking at that corridor, that's where all that kind of comes into play. We've had a number of communities, South Bend, Mishawaka, that do have quiet zones. There are some other communities that have worked on it for a while. I know Mayor Jenkins down in Napnee had a Chrissy grant, which is a rail safety improvement grant that focused on kind of crossing safety. They've been working though for a really long time negotiating with CSX on that. And so it can be complicated because ultimately the railroad wants to make sure, as well as we all want to make sure, that it's a safe crossing, and that if they're, that whistle is supposed to be a deterrent, right? And so if they're not going to blow the whistle, they want to have some degree of higher degrees of just protection, right? So
is there typically a funding component that the locality will be responsible for to do this?
yes, it's usually the role of the local government that's making that request. As you're working through that, you're usually then the funding entity to get that work done. Now that's a overgeneralization. I'm sure we can find different examples where, the railroad, if it's a crossing that they would like to have closed, they might provide some compensation for crossing that you could use. There's also
bargaining chip.
And then there's all sorts of, the state has 2 different programs. It's usually really small money, but they have the crossing closure program, which provides funding for closures if you're ever considering that, as well as, I think it's like up to 40,000.
I think they
Did they increase it?
But it's still
Yeah.
kind of minimal.
And then they have the OSI, the Other Safety Improvements Program, which you can do pavement markings or delineators or those kind of things. You usually cannot do gates, I want to say, with that program, because that's something that's more railroad
Section
equipment.
130 funds.
Section 130 is a whole different.
Exactly.
Yep.
That would not dovetail with this.
It hypothetically could. Section 130 is safety funding for rail crossings that have higher risks. And so it's doing various improvements, and it's a state NDOT program that comes down through the feds. Usually those are larger projects.
Yeah.
The other safety improvement is like a max award of like 20 to 40,000.
Got it.
So it's usually, hey, we're going to put pavement markings, stop bars at 20, 30 locations kind of across this corridor. It's usually small scale stuff, whereas the Section 130 is usually a larger capital investment. That's how I differentiate it.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Anyone
I'd
else?
second that motion.
Thank you. Discussion without a second. Go ahead. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
I'll let you take.
All right. So we did a primer on this maybe a month or 2 ago, but I'll try to walk through it. So every time there's the decennial census, not only do they release all sorts of information about population of counties and cities, but then the census goes through a process that designates urbanized areas. They have a whole formula for how that's calculated. Over the years, they have modified that formula here or there based on how far they'll go over, whether they'll jump 1.5 miles or 2 miles to get to the next urban section and include that. So it's based off of housing density, a lot of it, but it calculates then what is considered the urbanized area. For the federal highway programs, any urbanized area that's 50,000 or greater receives or has to have an MPO like MACOG. And then those urbanized areas receive funding for projects, right? So they don't necessarily have to compete in NDOT's program. Instead, they are working with that MPO to select those local projects. So in our area, when the census, we have a weird, I don't want to say weird, maybe I want to say just a different, unique setup where since Elkhart County has one MSA And St. Joe County has a different MSA. There's a weird part of the census, unique part of the census, that says that an urban area can't absorb another urban area in a separate MSA. So we technically in our region have 2 urbanized areas. So on the right-hand side in Elkhart County, we have the Elkhart urbanized area, which as you can see in the teal greenish color, that's what the census gives us. And that is pretty much most all of Elkhart, all of Goshen, parts of the county like say Dunlap, and all the way east to Bristol. And then we also have the South Bend urbanized area, which is largely all of South Bend, Mishawaka, Osceola, and Roseland, Granger. You can kind of see that on the left-hand side in the orange or burnt sienna. I don't know my colors well enough to know exactly what shade that is. But so when the census does its calculations, they give us this kind of raw shape that has all these edges and even at times kind of urbanized areas that are floating out all by themselves. You can see some of those kind of fragments floating. And it's our job as the MPO for the area to propose a smooth boundary. So we have till the end of this calendar year to propose a smooth boundary where we say, hey, based on roadways, based on projects, based on development, all of this we think should be inside the urbanized area. Okay. So if we go, I don't know if it was back or forward a slide. Yeah, right here. This shows you based on what we're proposing as the smooth boundary. The left-hand side shows you everything that would be added, which is just lots of little sections on the edges of the urbanized area. I know for those viewing at home, this might not translate well, but I'm going to stand up just so that we can point here. So there's like these small little portions on the edges that were added. And that's based on different roadways or based on the shape of the urbanized area that we were provided. And then on the right-hand side here, we're showing these potential areas that we're proposing would be excluded from the urbanized area. The reason a lot of this exclusion is being proposed, the urbanized area boundary, the recommendation from census, they made that a little bit tighter of how far they would jump to incorporate urbanized areas. And so it made that shape a little bit tighter. And so that's why we're proposing the smooth boundary to be a little bit tighter. Also, looking at our long range plan or all those kind of other items, there weren't a long list of projects proposed in some of those areas that all of those areas would still be eligible for, say, the rural program and applying to NDOT and those kind of things. So it's not a major loss. So all of this is to say is really our 2010 and 2020 boundaries are near identical. There are some small changes around the edges, but it's a near identical boundary as our growth hasn't necessarily been that rapid or sprawling to propose a larger urbanized area. The reason we don't propose something that is the entire, say, county for our urbanized area is then that would exclude all of those areas from participating in the rural program, right? We want to be able to maximize. We only have $16 million that we get for that, those 2 urban portions. And so if we tried to spread that over a larger geography, it wouldn't be effective. And so there's really nothing to gain by making it a much larger urbanized area than it has to be. We do also designate what's called a metropolitan planning area. And I know this is very technical and fun, but that MPA is anything that might be urbanized in the next 25 years. So for many years, it's been our long-standing kind of process to designate the 2 counties as our MPAs, St. Joe and Elkhart in whole. They're still able to participate in the rural programs and all of that. But from the inside kind of operations of what that means to us is when we fund staff time or those kind of things, they're able to use our planning funds, our urban funds for planning inside both of those counties. And then for Marshall and Kosciuszko, we apply to those for rural funding from the state. So there's really nothing that we're proposing as giant changes. I'm happy to answer any questions before we go into a little nuance of what I'd be asking for today.
I would assume that these areas are set based on population density.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
in
Warsaw has an urbanized area. So Warsaw, Plymouth, a few of our other areas have. The census this time around decided, they used to call them urban clusters, which was anything that was under 50,000. They would call an urban cluster or a small cluster. And so Leesburg, Warsaw is all kind of one cluster. In this census, they changed the name and now everything's called an urban area. It's just for the federal program, that urban area population has to be 50,000 or greater. So that Warsaw, Winona Lake, Leesburg population, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I want to say it's around 30.
Yeah.
Right. So a little bit off pace from that 50 to be considered there. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, we're only looking to designate this to determine whether or not they're in our rural projects or our urban projects.
Yeah, I think that's the easiest way to kind of simplify it.
James?
Yes, Mayor.
James, along those same lines as the question from Joe, what are the census? What are the population the population totals of each of those two?
Good question. You're going to put me on the spot. I'll answer it in a simplified manner. So the Elkhart-Goshen urbanized area is greater than 50,000, but less than 200,000. I want to say we can get you that exact population number. I see people feverishly typing on their phones, so maybe I'll get an answer here. I want to say it's around 100,000, but I could be off. We'll get you the exact number. But the Elkhart urbanized area is what's called a non-TMA or a non-transportation management area. So that means it's an urban area between 50,000 and 200,000. Whereas the St. Joe County urbanized area is greater than that 200,000 number. And so that makes it a TMA, a transportation management area. We honestly treat the two like one big TMA, which means there are a little bit of extra work that we have to do or whatnot. But usually what it means is TMAs are guaranteed funds through the apportionment process. Now in Indiana, INDOT has chosen for multiple decades to provide a sub-allocation to non-TMAs. So honestly, in Indiana, whether you're a non-TMA or a TMA, you're in control of those funds. So it doesn't really affect us in Indiana, but in some states, they have chosen not to give those funds to non-TMAs. But INDOT's always been a good partner and allows the MPO working with our local governments to make those decisions and investments in non-TMAs. So
Thank you.
I don't know. Yep. All right.
No,
So here's, oh, yep. Mayor, you had another question?
No.
Okay. All right. So here's the one nuance. We'd be asking for your endorsement of this smooth urban area and the designation of the MPA for St. Joe and Elkhart County. But there's this one little nuance that I want to talk through with you. So this South Bend urbanized area technically goes up into Michigan and it covers Niles and Buchanan. But since '73, we've had an agreement where Southwest Michigan Planning Commission covers everything in Michigan and we cover everything in Indiana. But as the census redid their calculations, of the South Bend urban area or whatnot, when they redid that formula, you'll see that there's this little bit of orange that is now actually in Elkhart County. Okay, kind of in that northwest corner of Elkhart County. So typically you're supposed to have an urban area, smooth boundary, fully containing that one urban area. But we've always had the distinction between the two urban areas happen at Ash Road or the County Line Road that's right there. So we talked to our federal partners. They seemed fine with us proposing, since these two urban areas are touching each other and we're all part of the same organization and we treat it all as like one big urban area. They were fine with us. They seemed fine, is what I'd say, with us proposing that the smooth boundary cut right down the county boundary. Okay. But we're going to go after this meeting and turn in our homework. We're going to give them a shapefile and say, this is what we're officially presenting you as our urban area. And this is due at the end of December. If they decide to get bothered by the fact that this orange area is not fully contained in the South Bend smooth, we would ask the board that we present this as our 2020 urban area boundary, smooth boundary, but that if working with the feds, that they provide comment on this northwest area, that we're able to redraw the smooth boundary to incorporate South Bends into South Bends and Elkharts into Elkharts. We'd like to leave it at the county line. Seems to make the most sense. This is like a very nuanced, silly, technocratic kind of thing to discuss, but happy to answer questions.
So I assume this is based on the fact that that northwest corner of Elkhart has the Granger zip code 46530, and they also have the Granger mailing address.
It's possible. Technically, the census doesn't look at like that kind of thing, but to the point, yes-ish. So it's a lot of like adjacent development is what it's going off of. And so it decided in the formula, because there's probably housing right here, that it was closer linearly to this area than to that area. They played with the formula, and so it's created this little nuance here. But I mean, ultimately we treat these two things as one. And so whether it's part of Elkhart or part of South Bend, but yeah, it's largely the Granger population that would be the area. But it's because of kind of that proximity of density to each other.
So if we have to make an amendment to that,
Yeah.
the two, I don't know what you call them, orange areas
Yep.
that are on the right of the yellow line,
Yeah.
would then turn blue, basically? I mean,
Yeah, so more that this yellow line,
right?
how it's drawn straight down Ash Road. The yellow line we would find, a county road right over here. We'd follow that county road and kind of snake over to make sure all this blue area is in, and we follow that line here and then cut back. And so there would be some jaggedness to the northwest corner is what we would do, just to make sure that one's all in one and one's all in the other. Talking with our federal partners, no one seemed too bothered by it when we proposed the conversation, but now they'll have 2 months to review it. So, I mean, it's possible that as it works its way up the chain, that someone might just say, hey, this needs to be adjusted.
So we could have a more serpentine edge there.
Yeah.
On the northwest corner.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there a reason why we don't just let it go to the blue side?
It's a fair question. I think it's just it's always been an easy distinction for the Elkhart Goshen urbanized area to be in Elkhart County. So the thing now that would be the potential here, it depended on how you, I guess, managed funds. We tend not to do this, but now Elkhart County would become an eligible recipient of funding in, say, the South Bend urbanized area. and then potentially parts of the city of Elkhart may become an eligible recipient of South Bend urbanized area funds. And so now you would have 5 or 6 potential applicants all competing in this pot, and then 3 in this pot. In the grand scheme of things, the way that we manage funds is not separate of, well, this area has 10 and this area has 6. We tend to manage the funds as there's a pot of 16 million. So ultimately, we tend to just pick the best projects out of those 16 million that are proposed. I think it's more just historic, and that it's from a transportation aspect, it's very clean and clear to follow Ash Road versus this follows a creek, right? Like this jaggedness is because of a creek. And we're not going to make funding decisions of projects based on a creek. We're going to make funding decisions based on a roadway. And so if Elkhart County is doing a project in this area, let's say, theoretically half the project could be funded with Group 1 funds, and half the project could be funded with Group 2 funds. And it just felt like it was Elkhart County is this pot, St. Joe County is this pot. So
with the
James?
population count.
yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. I think Susie chimed in before I interrupted.
Thanks, Mayor. So with the population counts that are determining what the urban area is, how many counts are we talking about? And do you know if that changes what our, as in Elkhart County's total census count is?
So it wouldn't change the population of Elkhart County.
So they're talking about truly a transportation.
Yeah.
So those
this shape is a unique shape that is a separate geography within the census. So yes.
So what I'm trying to determine, I was along the same lines of you, is that those individuals are probably of a Granger designation, but in Elkhart County, and
Sure.
therefore I'm guessing the urban. The urban designation might have to go in accordance with some school districts. I don't know how else they.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
It's an algorithm based off of housing density is largely what it's based off of. They don't look at a lot of other geographies.
But the density is still contiguous to the urban Elkhart city, and it's closer to the urban Elkhart
and
city.
If we go back to the 2010 one, it didn't serpentine the same way.
Well, no, because we've had some growth, right?
Yeah, well, no, like these areas were still largely urban before. It's just they were part of a different urbanized area.
So someone new got in the administration and changed the formula.
So they did change the formula, and they changed the formula based on this thing called leaps and bounds, or not leaps and bounds, it was leaps and jumps or something like that. And so it was this concept of, okay, you have urban density here. How far will you jump over a rural area that doesn't have density until you get to the next urban area that does have density to include it or not include it? I don't know why that affected this. It's wreaked a little bit of havoc on a number of people. This is very minor for us. Down in Evansville, because of the river, the Ohio River, and then the floodplain, they lost the entire portion of Kentucky out of their urban area. So Evansville and Henderson used to be one big urban area, and they lost all of Henderson because the leap and bound, or the leap and jump over the river and the floodplain wasn't long enough. And it was like, well, you're not supposed to have development in a floodplain. So like, I don't know what you're advocating here for census, right? It affected Cincinnati. They lost their whole portion of Lawrenceburg in Indiana. Down in Louisville, they had 4 different satellite kind of urban communities around their main urban communities. All of those fell out. Valpo even fell out of the Chicago urbanized area. So it's been really odd for us. It's a fairly minor, nuanced issue of it's either in one or the other.
But overall, it's not going to affect the city of Elkhart's ability to be claimed as an urban area because they're well over the.
They're well over.
James?
It's not, It's moved, yeah. Yes.
James, if you remember, I think about a couple of months ago, you shared these maps with us, and I actually brought up that little area. And I believe you indicated at that point that because it was project oriented, or the funding would be project oriented, it doesn't really impact us that much. Now, I'm not quite sure. I was listening to see what actually changed in those 2 months or in that time. But what I'm hearing you say is that if there are or is an open sort of a grant process for the St. Joe County area, Elkhart would then get an opportunity to request funds in that open, I guess, request, if you will. Excuse me for the crude terms. And that particular area we would compete with all of the other projects that was in that open pot for the St. Joe County area. Is that what I was hearing?
Yes-ish is what I would say. So
yes-ish.
yes, if we manage those funds as if they were separate pots and we did separate calls where it was just because what we're talking about is only the funds that MACOG manages. And so it would be yes, if we only did a call for projects for South Bend urbanized area, or we only did a call for Elkhart Goshen urbanized area. But when we do a call, which we don't do. We do a call for projects for the entire urban area, and Elkhart applies, or Elkhart County applies, and we consider the highest and best projects. So otherwise, things like prairie grade separation would never have happened because, that project was valued at well over $6 million. And so, something like County Road 17, that project is valued well over $6 million. So we trade funds back and forth, which is very fine and appropriate between these two urban areas to fund larger projects that we otherwise couldn't do.
Which is what
that's why we treat it as one pot.
Which is what I understood your answer to be 2 or 3 months ago. So I guess that drives to the next question. Is there any reason why it can't just stay as it is unless we just would like to see all the blue and all the red within each area?
That's honestly what we're proposing is, so when we presented this 2-3 months ago, we weren't sure what the feds were going to say. So we were just presenting it to you for informational purposes of, hey, this northwest corner may or may not change based on what our federal partners say. Federal partners came back, they said that they're okay with it. So we would like to propose it to just leave it right down, cutting down Ash Road. But my only ask is that if, when they're doing the final review, if they have decided to change their mind or there's a new reviewer, where we could create that serpentine to make sure all of orange is in orange and all of teal is in teal, right? So largely operationally on the ground, I do not believe that this is any risk or any challenge or really any problem in either of the scenarios. But
so what you're saying is if they come back and ask you, you want the approval now to go ahead and comply with the feds on what they'd like it to be.
Yeah, we don't want to have to bring it back to another board vote. We'll obviously inform you of what that final shape looked like. But we prefer it to look like this for simplicity. But if they really want to see that little etching, then we would like to be able to have the authority to make it.
So do we make a motion to allow you to do, or can I do that from the phone?
You unfortunately are not able to do it from the phone today, but we can accept your verbal support. We just won't be able to count it.
I'll move to approve.
I give that.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second, and there will be a new word added to the 24 dictionary. Yes-ish.
Yes.
And possibly no-ish. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, sir. Leah.
So last month, I gave a more detailed presentation on our regional brownfields program, which started back in 2018. And today I'm giving an update on our pursuit of additional federal funding to continue to grow that program. We received grants of 500 and 600,000 over the last few years, and we're now going back to apply for 1.5 million that we would use over the next 4 years. We found a lot of need and a lot of demand for good projects. I was just counting up yesterday that we will have leveraged $71 million of private investment in projects that we're supporting, mostly for housing projects across the whole region. We've got one in Warsaw, Goshen, a couple in Elkhart, South Bend, so really spread out, and the projects we're able to facilitate. And a lot of those housing developers, they come to us and say, we don't know what to do, we want to build here, but we've just discovered that there's a restriction on residential use on a site in Goshen, and we help address that with additional sampling, work with the state regulators on removing those restrictions, clean up planning if needed. And it's been really helpful for the partners to facilitate redevelopment where some of these environmental contamination issues come up. This is one of the projects that we're most excited about, so I'd just like to show an update on where the Arnold site redevelopment is at with 60 units of affordable housing there. So we'd like to see and support additional projects throughout the region in this way. I'll let James give a little more of a nuanced explanation on how we're configuring our coalition and the history there, but I just first wanted to mention what we propose as some of our target areas in the region based on, we have a regional working group of your staff who meet once a month and discuss the needs and the inventory we've identified. So in South Bend, we're looking at the west side of South Bend, kind of the Linden Avenue revitalization area in St. Joseph County. In Elkhart, we're looking at the Benham West neighborhood that's just south of railroad tracks downtown. There's a lot of momentum in that area around planning for housing. And then in Kosciuszko County, we're looking at Warsaw again. Tinky Oil is rising to the top in terms of staff priority and just wanting to go back, and since 2005, haven't really looked into, can we get those tanks out of the ground and turn that maybe into a park or something. Of course, continuing to look at the Arnold area and helping the Bowman Center with redeveloping that vacant lot they have and some other issues, tying that up as well, but kind of shifting our focus to downtown and the critical corridor connections program and supporting that. It's kind of the direction that we were thinking. And then Marshall County, we're shifting over to sort of the east side of downtown. There's some housing projects happening there. 123 East Washington Street, the former MACOG manufacturing. We're trying to support that project and getting that demolished and rebuilding some townhomes there. So want to continue to facilitate that with some local developers. And then our overall target area for MACOG would be supporting small towns. So we went out and just did a quick inventory of new sites, and we identified over 60 sites that are in small towns, Tyner, Milford, and some other, Atwood, some of the really small areas, as well as more populated small towns that we generally have a better relationship with, who actually have a town manager and can communicate to us what their needs are. So we've been identified many sites. We're still looking to pick that one small town site that we're going to write about and tell a good story in our application, but we certainly found the need, old gas stations, old commercial buildings, and things that we can help with. So that's an overview of the site aspect, the programmatic aspect, and James will explain a little bit about how some requirements are changing how we configure the coalition.
All right, so we've had this coalition in part or in whole for about 6 years now, roughly. Our first application was actually as a coalition, and the lead of that application was MACOG, and then the 4 non-leads, these are technical terms from EPA, were each of the counties. All right. That was a $600,000 award. It was good for 3 years because we had quality projects and sites and had a major project manager like Leah being able to ride herd over all of those. We were able to spend those funds down in 2 years on quality sites. So we reapplied. When we reapplied, EPA was rolling out this brand new, awesome sounding regional coalition program, which was expanded from what it previously was, where it was going to be a larger investment, over a little bit more time. We still don't know exactly what happened, but it sounded like EPA had some challenges on what's a region. And so they pulled back and didn't have a coalition call that year that we were looking to reapply. So Leah was very creative. She applied for the community program. And our community designation was the entire 4-county region. Now, technically, we've still had our coalition that entire time. It just wasn't EPA recognized, all right? And as part of the coalition, every town, every city, everyone's technically a part of it. It's just in EPA's eyes, like the counties were the non-leads. So they brought back the expanded regional coalition program. And so now that community grant that we had, it was 400,000, 500, so close, 500,000. And again, we could have spent it over multiple years, but we had the sites to really spend those funds down in 1 year. We're at 70% spent after 1 year. And so now that's why we're wanting to reapply so that we can continue to make sure that we have projects moving forward. So the new program is up to $1.5 million. It's 100% funds, so there's no match on it, just like normal. And it's over the potential of 4 years, okay? So this would be a much larger award. And so that's a good thing because we have a number of sites that are needing additional work, a number of sites that have been newly identified, et cetera. This is an application that goes to EPA Region 5. EPA Region 5, if you're not familiar, is Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota. So largely the Great Lakes industrial core. So we all have a lot of brownfield sites. So it's a fiercely competitive program. I think the first time we ever applied and we didn't get it, we missed out on being funded by like 1 to 2 points. I don't know if that's true. That's what they told us, okay? So every point kind of matters. In the new regional coalition program, when that was rolled out, they have changed some of the scoring criteria. And the biggest change is that they want to see a community organization as one of those non-leads in the coalition. And if you don't have a community organization as a non-lead, you do not get the 5-point bonus, which could, in a fierce competition, 5 points can sink one of these applications. So what we would want to propose as a coalition, and we can talk through the details. We're not asking you to approve this structure today, but more that we will apply for the program. But we would propose that MACOG be the lead again, and then that St. Joe, Marshall, and Kosciuszko would be non-leads, and that someone, say like hypothetically the Tolson Center, be the community organization non-lead, because that, I call it Benham West, but I could be wrong in the technical definition of the neighborhood, is a potential focus area in Elkhart County. Now, what that would mean, largely those are all the entities that EPA will recognize as non-leads. It doesn't mean that Elkhart County isn't eligible. You know, none of the cities were ever non-leads, right? But you have had tons of projects happen in the cities. There are some restrictions on non-leads of like they can't apply for their own assessment grants or these other things that EPA kind of enforces on a non-lead. And so
you can apply for a cleanup grant, which is
right.
somewhat significant.
Right. And so being a non-lead is it's not like it's like, oh no, we're not a non-lead anymore. What are we going to do? We're not eligible. No, you're still going to be able to access those funds and all those kind of things. But we would want to propose this structure because it makes sense with our target areas potentially to have a community organization like that would be embedded in one of those target areas of focus. I think it really makes sense based off of, what EPA is looking for. I think someone hypothetically like the Tolson Center could be a really good partner, especially if we're having public meetings around potential properties in that area. They'd be a potential anchor institution. And so I think all of that could make a lot of sense. What does it mean for any community in Elkhart County? You're all still fully able to apply. It's just you don't have the designation of non-lead, which doesn't come with bonus points or funding. So it's not like a loss. But we want to be very transparent and make sure that this is communicated well so that if, that is the structure moving forward, folks are not surprised and there's not misinformation about what that then means for, say, Elkhart County or wherever.
So what I understand as some of the potential pitfalls is that we cannot apply for remediation.
Actually, the other 3 counties would not be able to apply for a cleanup grant or their own assessment grant because they're already part of a coalition.
If you're a non-lead, you are boxed out of other EPA funding for a period of time.
So then the next question I would ask is, if it's a designation of a true non-for-profit, not a large organization. Tolson's a great organization. It's not large.
They want it to be
what kind of capacity, what are they expected to do?
Sure.
Can they handle it? What's on that agenda?
One of the things, and I've been talking with the executive director just to float this idea and see what they think. And their concern was capacity and, moving into their new facility and ramping up their programming. What we've proposed to do is put in some funding into our grant to pay a community liaison to attend our meetings, report back to them so that the staff capacity on their side is not being stressed and that we're actually building more capacity for them and them selecting a representative to kind of interface with our project. So that would help address that issue and they seem happy with that. So what they're expected to do would be more in kind, like providing the space, and also they mentioned they can do childcare so people can participate.
I'm just kind of curious, Mayor, your thoughts, Mayor Robertson.
I was listening inertly with this, and quite frankly, I had a couple of questions as well. With respect to, first of all, I want to say, Leah, thank you for your help with that one of our residents, and I know this is a little off topic. I don't know when to get this thank you in, but I wanted the rest of the board to know that we had a resident who was really concerned about how we communicated about land that could be contaminated in and around his residence. And Leah and Jim Weigart came in, and we all had a meeting with this particular resident who was really, he was more concerned, and there was some misinformation involved with his concerns, but Leah and Jim did a wonderful job at allaying his concerns, and we've since had a couple of conversations with him, and he was very, very happy that we had that meeting. And sometimes in our communities, we don't really get a chance to utilize that part of the resource from MACOG to address some of these concerns. And I had and quite frankly, I wish I didn't have I wish I didn't have that issue, but we did. It was we got it resolved, and Leah was right there with us. So thank you for that, Leah. With respect to this opportunity that you're listing, and I'm wondering whether or not you mentioned Benham West is the area. It's right, actually borders Benham West. It's not in Benham West.
Correct.
But we I appreciate any opportunity for this organization to begin to build their backbone to serve the rest of the area in and around it. But my question was, when you said that the EPA is moving into this area of targeted relationships like this, I want to get an idea of context. when you're saying that, what does that mean? I mean, what adjusted in the EPA in order for this to become a part of their general marching orders or their mission, if you will?
Yeah, EPA has a lot of experience, especially with super funds and going into communities. And so they've learned over the years what works and what leads to
Authentic engagement.
authentic engagement. And when you have a project from a developer that's just plunked down in a community, when it's already designed and it's ready to go, and then you're informing a community, that's when there's a lot of pushback on projects that a lot of money was put into can be, canceled at the last minute, and that's just not productive for anyone. So what they've seen is when you have more two-way communication and engagement throughout the whole process from the very beginning with the community, that it works much better than something happening behind the scenes just being presented at the very end for public officials to approve when the community's not been informed or aware of what's going on. So these are lessons they've learned over thousands of projects across the whole country. And so they're starting to build in their best practices that they deploy in the Superfund program into the Brownfields program and adjusting their scoring criteria. So, and eligible funding items. So for example, you didn't used to be able to pay a community liaison out of this funding to do some of the groundwork and the engagement in the community. We can do that now. We can also pay participant support costs. There's some options to provide childcare and other things just to make it so that individuals are more able to participate in the process.
And just to kind of make sure that all of Elkhart County has a full representation on this, we have had some great success in Goshen, specifically near their downtown area. They have staff, the La Casa Center and all of that have developed. I just want to make sure that one of the reasons we're considering Tolson Center and near Elkhart is, one, to make sure that all of our areas are represented overall, and that the Tolson Center area and the neighborhood surrounding it is a prime next step. And not someplace, again, near Goshen that's already kind of checked it off their list and moved on.
So in the application, we're encouraged and required to list those potential target areas and those areas of potential focus. Like, hey, what are you going to do with these funds as a hypothetical, right? So if you think of it like the regional cities plan, it may list some ideas of what might happen, but those aren't always going to be absolutely everything and only that will be funded, right? This is, the kind of general geographies that we're going to focus on. But yes, if a project comes up in Goshen or a project comes up in Middlebury or a project comes up in Napanee, those are still fully eligible and fully allowed. And I mean, there are tons of projects that I'm sure Leah could mention that weren't necessary. Weren't necessarily mentioned in our applications before. So, yeah.
And I think it's important to understand how we function as well, programmatically. So we don't have any exclusive meetings of only the coalition members and MACOG are discussing over here what we want to do. Right. We actually function through a working group that invites all counties and all cities who aren't even non-league members to begin with. All cities have the opportunity to be part of those monthly meetings, and everyone holds veto power over any decision to select a site. So we would add the Tolson Center and give them the opportunity to have that seat as well, but we still give it to cities like Natasha will meetings for our county when we're sort of ranking and looking at doing research into what sites that we can help with. That's how we function. It's broad and inclusive. It's never been restricted to just county representatives.
And I feel it's incumbent upon me to say, I keep saying hypothetically, because they, as the Tolson Center, hasn't necessarily agreed to be a non-lead member. They're pondering that, and their board doesn't meet until the end of the month. So that's why we're not voting on a structure. We're voting on the endorsement of the EPA Brownfield grant application, which is saying like MACOG can apply, that I, as the executive director, can sign those documents to submit the application, and if we're awarded, to execute those agreements. Typically, typically a resolution like this would say how much we're committing in match. This is a 100% program, so our match commitment is 0. Really, it's saying that we are going to apply. We are working with each of the commissioners and then community organization to try and figure out if all of those folks are in. But in terms of like capacity and what does it mean, The EPA is looking for more neighborhood level organizations, smaller organizations, not something that is a larger nonprofit per se. So I do feel like this meets with really what they're looking for potentially. But I mean, from the non-lead perspective, think of what we've asked you as counties to do over the last 6 years, and it's largely been to work through providing sites, meeting to talk about those locations, trying to engage the public when we have been having public sessions. And I think something like Tolson could easily participate in all of that.
The biggest piece for counties is just, you have so many more touch points with small towns, working through so many different projects and issues. So just being aware of what's going on in these smaller towns that maybe they're not aware of our funding source for particular projects. That's been really helpful.
So in the grand scheme of things, the majority of the work does fall on Leah's shoulders and then our contracted vendor. So I think Leah will be able to guide any community organization that jumps on as our potential community organization through providing authentic assistance to us.
Both James and Leah and Susie, to answer your question, I based on the information that has just been shared, I am strongly in favor of this. Sounds as if it doesn't exclude anyone, and it allows us to be able to track and target areas where communication can be a challenge, and allow us to be able to kind of get the information to people in a manner that makes sense. And it doesn't exclusively mean that Tolson and the surrounding area is the only participant as it relates to these brownfield and EPA funding opportunities. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
I'll make a motion for you to apply for the grant. I mean, James and Leah, I mean, I know what you've done in our community. I mean, we trust your judgment and what's best and going to make us the most competitive in this application, because we all know we're competing with multiple states, not just the state.
Yeah, and I mean, even there are a number of coalitions from the state of Indiana that will be applying, because not everybody was innovative like Leah and decided to pivot and write a community grant for a region. I think we were the ones who did that. And so really a number of our peers throughout the state have been waiting for the regional program to open back up. And so, it'll be fierce just within Indiana, let alone, the rest of Region 5.
And that 5 point could be huge.
I absolutely think it'll be huge.
I second the motion.
There's a motion on the side. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I just again like to thank Leah and MACOG for how they've handled the funds, the first 2 grants. I'm very excited for the future with the challenges that we've got, and again, the results that we've shown. This is great, so thank you.
Can I ask one more question? I'm sorry. Since we've pivoted and gone on the community side, as the regional grants open back up, can we then also apply for those? Do we lose any?
Yeah. So once you are 70% spent on an assessment grant, you can reapply, and that's where we're at right now. Is we have.
So it doesn't matter if it's a regional or a community designation grant?
Right now, we have a community grant.
Yeah.
And we're now applying for.
Now we're going back to regional. We just took a break because they closed the regional program for a while.
I'm sorry.
No, you're okay.
Well, we kept
going. But we didn't want to stop, so we kept going. And so now that the regional program is open, we're at 70% spent after 1 year on our community grant. And so that's why we're reapplying.
We do have a motion on the side. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion carries. Thanks, Leah.
All right, I keep giving you deceivingly short agendas that have discussionary items that take a little bit longer, so I apologize. In our staff update, we will try to cover quick. We do have a few new folks with us. First, we are housing an AmeriCorps member, Kelsey Tribold. I always get the tree part wrong. All right, Tribold. She's down in Bloomington at the MPO conference, but she will be our AmeriCorps member focusing on clean transportation and energy. So things like Partners for Clean Air, Drive Electric, electric vehicles, those different things that we've been working on. So adding really capacity for Leah and the sustainability department. So she'll be our AmeriCorps member over the next roughly 11 months working in those areas. And then we have 2 new transit planners that are here live and in person. We have Gary. Gary, if you want to say hi.
Welcome.
As master superintendent, and now I'm looking at I'm excited for the journey.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Welcome. And then we have Joe. Joe.
Howdy all, I'm Joe, originally from Kalamazoo, did my master's in public policy in the University of Chicago. Glad to be here.
Thank you.
And so both Gary and Joe will be working on all things public transit, especially working with the interurban trolley. All right. Next, we have some grants and funding, and Leah already sat down. So Leah, you're back up.
Okay. So I'll make a long story short. So, a new funding source is bringing $4 billion of implementation funding for reduction measures for climate change. However, in order to be eligible for these projects, which can range, there's multi-million-dollar implementation projects for these reduction measures, you have to be part of a plan. So the first phase is planning. And the way it works for us is our whole region will fall under the state's climate plan. And so the state is in the process of, there's some meetings listed here, some community engagement that they're doing. We'll make sure you all are aware of the draft plan when that comes out to make sure that projects you have in mind would fit under that state plan to then be eligible for these larger implementation grants. So projects have multiple benefits. So whether it also reduces greenhouse gas emissions and improves health and provides a trail in, connecting Elkhart and Mishawaka or something, anything that would also fit under the climate change umbrella could also be eligible for that. So, James, I don't know if you have anything to add about the process.
Yeah, no, really right now it's with the state, for the state to develop a state plan that we would fall under, but our job is to help as a group and as the public at large to help inform that state plan to make sure that potential project types that you all are looking for out of that potential implementation can get done. So whether that's trails or whatnot, that could be an option. But really, that's all with the state right now as they work through their plan.
There are no meetings in our region specifically. The closest ones coming up would be Fort Wayne on October 24th and in Portage on November 2nd. But those are all, they'll be live streamed. So if you want to plug into that, you don't have to drive that distance. And then, of course, I think the more valuable thing will be reading the draft plan to see what the gaps are, what's missing that you have in mind. So it might be fleet electrification or something that you want to have significant resources for.
We've mentioned this at previous meetings, but just wanted to highlight that the NDOT roll call for projects will be opening up October 30th and will be open for the month of November. I know we've heard from a variety of your staff related to some potential projects that you will be applying for. However, just wanted to reiterate that we're always happy to help kind of review and prepare those applications in conjunction with your staff. And I'm great at being concise, so I won't go too into depth, but I wanted to make you all aware that our state fiscal year 23 annual listing of obligated projects is now live on our website. It's currently in a non-exciting Excel table view. However, we're required to produce this document every year, and we also like to provide a little bit of additional context when we're putting together the report. So essentially, the listing is a list of projects that include obligations, which is the federal government's legal commitment to providing funding for a project. And so I just wanted to provide a quick kind of breakdown of what obligations happened in our region over this past fiscal year, which went from July of 22 to June of 23. You can see here that $47.9 million in federal funding was obligated for local projects, with an additional 43.1 million in federal funding for state projects. Typically, the state has a larger chunk of this pie. However, in more recent years, they've been using funding sources such as the toll lease proceeds for funding. And so that federal obligation is much smaller than in kind of previous years. The 43.1 million represents a good portion of the US 20 added travel lanes project in Elkhart County. Also something to note is transit is not included in this obligation chart because both the interurban trolley and Transpo programmed funds from this past fiscal year after the fiscal year that started, and so those obligations will be reflected in the next year's ALAP report. The total LPA obligations by county kind of provides a snapshot of how much funding was obligated in each county. As you can see, the St. Joseph and Elkhart County makes about 65% of what was obligated last year, and that's largely due to the kind of dedicated urbanized area funding that we have, the 16 million. However, there is a pretty decent amount of funding that was obligated in Kosciuszko and Marshall County. One of those projects included for Kosciuszko is the 1300 North grade separation. And then Marshall County had projects such as Homeham Drive reconstruction in Plymouth, as well as a couple of bridges within Marshall County that had obligations. Then this is the last slide. This provides a little breakdown of the types of funding that were used for projects. As you can see, our surface transportation block group funding is the primary source of funding that projects use. Overall, we had 10 local road projects obligate for a total of 26.1 million. Pretty notable is that we had 14 projects in our region with obligations for a total of 12.4 million. So you can see that a lot of work continues on making sure that our bridges are in functioning and up to a standard of condition that we need in the region. We had 2 intersection improvement projects, including the wonderful Peanut About in Elkhart County, the County Road 13, 15, 118. And then lastly, we had 7 bike and pedestrian projects for 7.8 million. That includes things such as the coal line in South Bend, as well as the sidewalks project that let in more south. So that's a kind of quick snapshot of obligations this past fiscal year. We'll have the full detailed report coming later this month if you're interested in checking it out.
Thank you, Caitlin. Privilege of the floor. And public comment? Hearing none, how about an adjournment?
Motion adjourned.
Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor, signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Good move.